It started like any other family group call. Half the screen filled with distracted faces, someone fumbling with audio, someone yelling in the background about laundry. I'd almost forgotten they scheduled it. When I joined, they were already deep into planning Mom's birthday party. They say if you've ever been betrayed by family, hitting like brings peace, subscribing brings clarity, and commenting brings karma to those who wronged you. Try it, and tell me where you're watching from. Anyways, Tessa, my older sister, sat front and center, with her oversized sunglasses perched on her head like she was on a reality show. My Aunt Donna had that same glass of boxed wine she always had during our Zoom calls. And the rest? Cousins, in and out, mostly muted, checking in just enough to say they were in. I said, "Sorry I'm late." Got caught up with a client meeting. No one responded. Tessa said, "Anyway, so we're thinking brunch at that new place by the marina. The one with the floral wall and the live violinist." "Oh yes, that's perfect," Aunt Donna gushed. "Classy, but not too stuffy. Just family, you know?" I raised a brow. "Should I book my flight? I can—" But they kept talking. Over me. Around me. I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't new. It was like being at the family table again as a kid, speaking and realizing halfway through that no one had been listening. I was used to fading into the background, but something about that moment hit differently. Maybe it was because I'd made the effort. Maybe it was because I'd cleared my schedule to be there, only to feel like a ghost in my own family. I stayed on the call for a few more minutes, listening to the logistics, the food, the theme, who'd bring what. Then the doorbell rang. "Hang on," I said, reaching for my headset. "I'll be right back."
I didn't leave the call, just stepped away to grab a delivery, a batch of limited edition prints I'd designed for a campaign. It took maybe 4 minutes. When I came back, I froze in the doorway, because they were still talking, and they didn't know I could still hear them. Tessa laughed, loud and nasal. God, can you imagine if Camila actually comes? She'll probably wear one of her weird patterned skirts and sit in the corner like always. Someone chuckled. I couldn't tell who. A cousin's voice, Ryan maybe, said, "Wait, is she still drawing cartoons or whatever?" "She calls it illustration now," Tessa said with air quotes in her voice. "Apparently she makes a living off it, but like, come on." Aunt Donna snorted. "She's always been different. I mean, it's sweet that she wants to feel included, but this is really just for people who get Mom, you know?" Someone else added, "She's nice, just not really part of things." And then silence. Not because someone defended me. Because they were done. I stared at my laptop screen, camera off, mic muted. I was still on the call, and I had just heard my entire family talk about me like I was some pity case, like I was some strange cousin who didn't really belong. I didn't say a word. I reached forward, closed the laptop gently, and sat in the silence of my studio apartment. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I looked around me. At the framed cover of the art magazine on the wall with my name in gold foil. At the stack of signed contracts waiting to be mailed. At the dried lavender on the windowsill, the warmth of my workspace, the shelves of supplies I had bought with my own money. I looked at all of it and whispered, "So that's how they see me." They thought I wouldn't notice if I wasn't invited, but I had noticed everything now, and something in me shifted. I didn't hang up. I let them finish. I could have clicked out the second I realized they forgot I was still there. I could have spared myself the sting of hearing my own name being passed around like some tired family anecdote. But I didn't. I sat there, staring at the frozen image of my cousin Tessa on the video call as she adjusted her hair and rolled her eyes. Tessa said, "I mean, she still draws cartoons in her apartment, right? Is that even a real job?" I stayed silent. My mic was off. My camera was off. But my heart? My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear her finish her sentence. Aunt Laura chimed in, laughing. She's always been different, quiet. Honestly, I didn't even realize she was on this thread. Tessa said. She wasn't supposed to be. I just hit the group button. Whatever. It's not like she ever says anything anyway. They all chuckled. Even my own brother Marcus added with a snort, she's got that loner energy, always in her own little world with her sketch pads and tea. Tea. I stared at the half-empty mug next to me, the one I had been sipping as they started the call, before they forgot I existed, before they decided I was furniture. They kept talking about the family reunion, about how they wanted it to be fun this time, about who could afford what, who would bring what dish, who had real updates to share. When it came to me, it was mostly silence until the jokes started. Tessa said maybe she could bring some of those stick figure drawings and put them on the fridge. Marcus laughed. She should draw a comic about this call. Title it, Oops, I Still Suck. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just closed my laptop slowly, deliberately, like sealing a box of old memories you don't want to throw out but can't bear to look at anymore. And then I got up, walked across my apartment, and pulled my sketchbook from the shelf. The one with the soft linen cover, the one Grandma gave me when I turned 16. The last birthday anyone in the family remembered without needing a Facebook reminder. I opened to a blank page. The white space stared back at me, pure, silent, full of possibility, and I drew. I didn't know what yet, just lines, shapes, a girl sitting in a corner of a party no one invited her to, a woman holding a phone, her face reflected back in cracked glass, a hand offering a pencil like a lifeline. My pencil moved faster than my thoughts. I didn't stop drawing until the sun dipped behind the buildings outside my window and shadows stretched across the walls. The pain in my wrist was sharp, real. But so was the clarity in my chest. I didn't need their validation, but I wasn't going to let them keep this version of me either. I wasn't the joke. I wasn't the afterthought. And maybe, just maybe, it was time they saw who I really was. The next morning, I didn't check the family chat. I didn't open any oops messages or fake apologies. I knew they'd eventually realize what happened, that I had been there the whole time. Maybe they'd scramble, or maybe they wouldn't even care. But I wasn't waiting for that anymore. Instead, I started cleaning. Not just dishes or clutter. I cleaned my portfolio. I went through the years of art I'd created and tucked away. Comics, panels, concepts for a story I never thought anyone would read. Personal, vulnerable things I'd convinced myself weren't worth sharing. Because every time I came close, a voice that sounded too much like Tessa's would whisper, "Who do you think you are?" But that voice wasn't mine. It never was. So I packed everything into one clean digital folder. And then, after taking one long breath, I submitted my pitch. To 3 publishers, then 5, then 10. Some rejected me, some didn't respond. But a week later, one said yes. Not just a "we like your style." A real yes, a contract, an offer to publish a graphic novel series based on my sketches. They called it raw, personal, and quietly powerful. It didn't make the hurt vanish, it didn't erase the call, but it gave me something better: momentum. I worked late into the nights, fueled by spite and ambition and something even deeper: love. Love for the part of me that still dared to create, even when no one clapped, especially when no one clapped. My first book would be called Unseen. It told the story of a girl born in the shadows of a loud, glittering family. A girl who heard everything and said nothing until one day she decided to draw the truth. I didn't name the characters after my real family, but I didn't have to. The story was mine, and now the world would read it. I kept going, not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. I started gaining a following online. Quiet at first, then growing. Emails from readers who said, I feel like you wrote this about me. People who also sat through group chats where they were invisible. People who were called weird or quiet or too sensitive. People like me. My second book sold better than the first. An interview came next, then a podcast, then a small speaking tour at independent bookstores. And all the while, I said nothing to my family. Not out of bitterness, out of peace. They weren't part of this journey. They didn't believe in it. So they didn't get to share the spotlight now, but they were going to see it. That much I knew. And when they did, when they saw my name on the shelves, my face in the articles, I wanted them to remember that call. I wanted them to sit with the memory of their own laughter. Because this time, the punchline belonged to me. That call didn't break me. It revealed me. And I let them finish talking. But now it was my turn. You want to know the truth? They've never known me. Not really. The Camila they picture, quiet, meek, odd little Camila, they stitched that version together out of misunderstandings and impatience. Out of the times I didn't raise my voice, didn't correct them, didn't join in on their noise. But I remember everything. I remember the corner. Every party, every reunion, every living room too full of cousins and casseroles. While they laughed and chased each other, I sat cross-legged with a sketchbook balanced on my knees, trying to capture the way sunlight hit the rim of a soda can, or how Aunt Teresa's curls bounced when she got excited. I was always drawing, always watching, not because I was scared to join in, but because the view from the sidelines taught me more about them than they ever bothered to learn about me. I remember the beach trip when I was 11. Everyone lined up for a family photo, matching shirts, forced smiles. And I was behind the camera, not because I wanted to be, but because no one had noticed I wasn't in the lineup. I remember the exact moment I realized they didn't miss me. Not during the photo. Not when we got back to the rental house. Not even when the prints came in the mail. They looked at the picture, all of them beaming under the sun, and no one said, "Wait, where's Camila?" That was the summer I stopped expecting invitations to matter. I remember Tessa in high school, bringing her new boyfriend over. I was 16, curled up with my laptop, working on a short comic for an online art challenge. Tessa introduced me with a shrug. "She's not really like us," she said, laughing. "She's different. You'll see." I smiled politely, pretended I didn't hear. But I remember every word. They always mistook my quiet for weakness, my solitude for sadness, my choices for mistakes. They don't know that I like living alone, that I don't need noise to feel alive. That silence, for me, is where all the color lives. They never asked what I was building. That's the thing. People assume that if you're not loud about your progress, you must not be making any. But I've been building a life for years. Carefully, deliberately, without applause. My apartment isn't big. It creaks when the radiator turns on. The kitchen light flickers if I use the microwave and toaster at the same time. But every wall is covered in my art. Pieces from clients, from passion projects, from sleepless nights and sudden ideas. Sketches, canvases, digital prints, color everywhere. My studio is the second bedroom. Half the space is taken up by a drafting table, the other by a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf I assembled myself. And in the corner, always, the same old stool I used as a kid, the one Grandma kept for me at her house. She was the only one who ever asked about my drawings. "Who's that?" she'd say, pointing. "Why is he smiling like that?" She never made it feel like a hobby. She made it feel like a gift. Sometimes I still talk to her when I paint. The rest of them? They never asked what I was working on, only if I was still doing that art stuff. But they don't know. They don't know my client list includes 3 international nonprofits, that I've illustrated a children's book that sold 80,000 copies, that I've worked on character design for 2 indie games, one of which is up for a narrative award this fall. They don't know that I've been quietly working with a curator in New York for over a year, that we've finalized the theme, the title, and the dates. That last week, I mailed the signed contract for my first solo exhibit. New York City. Me. They don't know that one of my prints hangs in the lobby of a tech company they probably idolize. That my name, while not famous, has started to appear in spaces they wouldn't believe I belonged in. And the best part? I never did it to prove anything to them. I did it because it made me feel alive. I remember the first time I got paid more than rent for a project. I danced in my kitchen with cold pizza in one hand and my phone in the other. I remember crying when I saw my illustration in a bookstore window. Not because of the recognition, but because that version of me, the little girl in the corner with the sketchbook, had stayed true. She hadn't given up, no matter how invisible they made her feel. They say I'm different. They're right. I don't chase their approval. I don't compete for space in their world. I built my own. Brick by quiet brick, sketch by sketch, deadline by deadline. And now, I sit at my tiny table with a cup of tea going cold, staring at the final proof for my exhibit catalog. My name printed in bold at the top. Camila Rivera, Still Life in Silence. A solo exhibit. The title was my idea. It's not about still life paintings. It's about my life. The one I lived quietly, the one they never bothered to see. I wonder what they'll say when they find out. I wonder if they'll be proud, or just surprised that I existed beyond the boxes they put me in. But that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing it because I have something to say. And finally, I found a way to say it that doesn't require anyone's permission. When the curator called last week, she said, "You know, your work reminds me of someone who's been listening her whole life. Not just watching, listening." I had to pause before I replied. Because she was right. I've been listening. To every time they laughed without me. Every whisper. Every joke. Every dismissal. And now I'm turning it into something beautiful. Because pain doesn't scare me. Loneliness doesn't define me. And silence? Silence is my greatest canvas. I stepped outside just after sunset, the sky streaked with pink and lavender. At the mailbox, I held the manila envelope for a moment. Thick, official, addressed to the gallery in New York. And then I let it go. One quiet delivery, years in the making. I smiled. "They think they know who I am," I said softly. "But they've never stayed quiet long enough to really see me." The message popped up in the family group chat midweek. Lunch at Casa Selena, Saturday at noon. Birthday surprise for Dad. Don't be late. I stared at it, blinking. Casa Selena. They had no idea. It was one of those trendy white stone cafes clinging to the cliffside, where sunlight hit the sea just right and plates came out looking like art. I'd designed the branding last fall. What they didn't know was that part of the deal was equity, a small stake in exchange for my creative direction. Logos, murals, packaging. The mural near the back terrace? That was mine. I called Marco, the manager, just to be sure. "I saw your name on the reservation list," he said. "Table for 12 under Lancaster. Want me to block it?" "No," I said. "Let them come. Just let me know when they arrive." Saturday came like a tide, smooth at first, then rising fast. I dressed quietly, wearing a long linen dress and a scarf I'd dyed myself in sun-faded rose. Nothing flashy, but enough to feel like myself. I arrived an hour before them, took a seat near the back patio where I could see the entire dining area. Marco greeted me with a knowing nod and a smile. He didn't say anything, just refilled my tea and walked away. At noon, they showed up. Tessa was first, of course, hair blown out, giant sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She looked around and sniffed. "This place is nice," she said, "but it's kind of pretentious." Her boyfriend Josh followed close behind, holding her purse like a trophy. My aunt and uncle walked in next, then my cousins, trailing like ducklings. No one noticed me. I was half-shadowed, facing the water. Marco greeted them at the front. "Welcome to Casa Selena," he said. You're the guests of our artist in residence, I believe? There was a pause, a ripple of confusion. Uh, we're the Lancaster party? Tessa said, glancing around. I think we reserved this like weeks ago. Yes, Marco replied. But today's table was specially held for you, courtesy of our artist in residence. I watched them glance at one another. Tessa frowned. Wait, who? Marco smiled and gestured toward the back. It was like dominoes falling in slow motion. First my uncle looked, then my aunt, then finally, Tessa. She blinked. I raised my glass. Just once. No smirk, no wave, just acknowledgement. Tessa's mouth opened, then closed. She turned back toward the others. Camilla's here, she said. She's already seated. No one said much after that. They followed the host toward my table, some of them trying to smile. My aunt looked especially pale, like the sunlight had caught her off guard. They sat down slowly, carefully, the air thick with questions no one quite dared to ask. So, my uncle finally said, unfolding his napkin. You've been here before? Yes, I said. A few times. Tessa didn't look up from the menu. Didn't realize you knew this place. I helped build it. That caught their attention. I sipped my tea while they exchanged confused glances. No one asked for clarification. Not yet. The waiter arrived, overly cheerful, and rattled off the specials. They ordered in murmurs. I asked for the house salad and sea bass like I always did. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. Let them squirm. Let them sit in the space they'd created, the one where I was invisible. As the meal went on, I let them talk. About their weekend plans. About Tessa's influencer trip to Miami. About my cousin's new dog. The usual noise. I just listened. Occasionally, someone tried to loop me in. So, Camila, Tessa asked finally, what have you been up to? I folded my napkin, laid it gently beside my plate. Just working. That sketch stuff? I smiled. Something like that. By dessert, I could feel the energy shifting. My aunt leaned over to me. Sweetheart, did you say you helped build this place? I nodded. The branding, some of the design. I work with places like this sometimes. Tessa gave a sharp laugh. Since when? I looked her in the eye. Since you forgot I was still on the call. The table went quiet. The sound of waves hit the windows, soft and rhythmic, like breath. I took one final sip of tea. You booked this place, I said, but I already belonged here. No one had a response. We finished the meal in polite silence, polished off the cake, split the bill. They left in small clusters, still whispering, still unsure. I stayed behind. Marco came over and refilled my glass. They seemed surprised, he said. They always are, I replied. I didn't come to embarrass them. I didn't need revenge. I just needed them to see what they'd missed. I wasn't loud, I wasn't flashy, but I had built something real, and this time they had to walk through it. I arrived before they even realized it. I didn't sit with them right away. I needed a moment. The ocean breeze swept through the terrace, and the sun hit just the edge of the cafe roof, casting golden light over the pale wood tables and crisp linen umbrellas. The staff knew me, of course. I had worked with them for months, designing the new interior mural, the menu typography, even the layout of the space. It had been part of a creative equity deal with the owners. A good one, discreet and very intentional. I stayed near the back entrance, chatting with one of the servers while watching my family settle in. Tessa was already complaining about the wine list. This place is nice, she said, swirling her glass like she knew what she was doing. But it's a little pretentious. My uncle grunted in agreement, trying to flag down a waiter like they were invisible. My aunt rummaged through her bag loudly, asking if they had real cream for her espresso. And then came the moment. The manager walked up to me, smiled, and said, Ms. Navarro, your table is prepared when you're ready. I thanked him with a nod. Then I turned, and walked out toward the main dining area. They noticed me immediately. The sudden quiet at their table was almost musical. I passed a few diners who recognized me. Some had seen the press release about the cafe's reopening. Others were just familiar with my art online. One little girl sitting near the fountain tugged her mother's sleeve and pointed at me. I heard her whisper, "That's her, the one who painted the jellyfish wall." She held up a sketch pad. I smiled, knelt beside her, and signed the inside cover. "Thank you," she said shyly. I told her, "Keep drawing. You never know where it'll take you." Then I stood, calm as ever, and walked toward the table where my family sat in stunned silence. Tessa's voice was the first to crack through. "Wait, you're the artist in residence?" I didn't even sit down. I just looked at her and said, "Welcome. Hope you're enjoying the place." She opened her mouth, then closed it. My aunt blinked like she was trying to process a glitch in the matrix. My uncle cleared his throat and then went right back to buttering his roll. I didn't gloat. I didn't announce anything. I didn't need to. The server came by and asked, "Would you like to be seated now, Ms. Navarro?" I nodded. "Yes, but I'll sit outside." I turned back to them, one hand on the back of a chair. "You're welcome to finish your meal. The cafe has a policy. Family of artists eat free today." They stared. "I didn't make that policy," I added. "But I'm not arguing with it." And with that, I walked away.
I sat on the far end of the terrace, near the edge where the view opened up to the ocean. My food arrived soon after, perfectly plated, familiar, a quiet indulgence I had earned. The server placed a folded napkin beside my plate with a quiet, "It's an honor to serve you." Across the patio, I could still see my family. They weren't laughing now. My cousin leaned toward my aunt and whispered something, casting occasional glances my way. At one point, I caught a single phrase float through the salt air. "Is she famous?" I didn't answer. I let the silence do the talking, and for the first time, they actually listened.
After the waiter cleared their dessert plates, I slipped away from the terrace and wandered through the back gallery of the cafe. I needed a breath, just a little space to think. The walls were lined with my latest pieces, a blend of coastal sketches and soft pastels. I hadn't expected them to be there yet. I'd imagined finishing this exhibit in peace, unveiling it quietly in the fall. But there they were, all at once, my work, my name, and my family colliding in one room. I heard footsteps behind me, slower than the others. I already knew who it was. Tessa said, "Camila, wait." I turned, letting my fingers rest on the frame of one of the paintings. Tessa stepped closer, her voice low, unsure. "We didn't know you were doing all this, the cafe, the art. You never told us." I didn't answer right away. I just let her words hang in the space between us, like the last brushstroke that doesn't quite land on the canvas. Then I said, "Would it have changed what you said when you thought I wasn't listening?" Her expression flickered, like she'd been slapped with silence. Tessa said, "That wasn't fair. You know how people talk, people joke. It didn't mean anything." I nodded slowly. It meant something to me. She crossed her arms, trying to look casual. "I mean, we just didn't know you were doing this well. You could have said something." "I wasn't hiding anything," I said. "You just weren't looking." Tessa fell quiet. For the first time in a long while, she didn't have a comeback. Behind her, the rest of the family lingered at the entrance of the gallery, pretending to admire the art. I could hear my uncle murmuring to my aunt, "I had no idea she was this good." My cousin Lily was already pulling out her phone, searching for my name online. It was strange to watch them like this. Their sudden interest. Their eager attempts to understand the version of me they'd ignored for years. They started asking questions. What platform did I use for my commissions? Was I represented by a gallery? How did I learn to draw people like that? The shift was immediate, like someone had flipped a switch labeled, Now she's worth our time. They laughed when I mentioned my early webcomic days, said they always knew I was a little creative. Tessa even leaned in and whispered, "We should collaborate sometime. I could model for you. Wouldn't that be fun?" Fun. That word hung there, flimsy as tissue paper. It wasn't curiosity that brought them over. It was validation by proximity. They saw something of value now. Not in me, but in what I'd built. They respected my success, not me. I stayed calm, polite, gracious even. I answered their questions with just enough detail to satisfy them, but never so much that they could pretend they'd always known. Because they hadn't. I remembered every birthday party where my name was left off the cake, every holiday dinner where they asked me to take the photo instead of being in it, every group text I'd been accidentally left out of. They didn't see me. Not until now. And even then, it wasn't really me they were looking at. Tessa tried again. "I mean, look, I get it. We've all had moments. But you could have spoken up, Camila. You could have told us how you felt." I looked at her, steady. "I did. Once. Years ago." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I called you after you made fun of my sketches in college. Do you remember what you said?" She frowned, searching. "I don't know. Probably something dumb. You said, 'Maybe you're just too sensitive. It's not like you're a real artist anyway.'" The silence between us thickened. Tessa looked down. "I was a kid." "You were 19, I said. She sighed. "Well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that." "I know," I replied, "but you meant something." She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. There wasn't much left to say. Eventually, my aunt approached too. "Camila," she said gently, "this place is beautiful. Your mother would have loved it." I smiled faintly. "Thank you." She continued. "We've been talking. Maybe we could all do something together. A family exhibit. Your uncle has some photos from our last trip, and I know Lily writes poetry. Wouldn't that be lovely?" I nodded slowly. "It's a nice idea." But I didn't say yes. They were trying. I could see that. But it wasn't the kind of trying that came from regret. It came from realization, of value, of opportunity. And maybe that was worse. I didn't need them to apologize. I needed them to see me before I became useful. After a while, I stepped back toward the cafe entrance. "Thanks for coming," I said, smiling. "I hope you enjoyed the meal." Tessa said, "You're leaving?" "I've got work to do," I said. My aunt said, "Let's at least take a picture, for Mom's scrapbook." I nodded. I stood with them. I even smiled. But in that photo, I didn't belong to them. Not really. When it was over, I slipped through the cafe and returned to the terrace. The ocean breeze had picked up, brushing strands of hair across my cheek. I let it. Inside, the lights were dimming for the evening service. I could hear laughter, music, the familiar rhythm of plates being set and glasses clinking. I sat at a small table near the back wall. No one came with me, and I didn't need them to. I pulled my sketchbook from my bag and flipped to a fresh page. The lines came quickly, smoothly. A coastal breeze. A long table. A woman seated at the edge, unnoticed, until the light hit her just right. I didn't draw their faces. I didn't need to. I just kept going, letting the pencil do what words couldn't. And when I looked up again, the cafe was full. Of strangers, of stories, of people who didn't know me, but were willing to see. I stayed there for a while, letting it be enough, because it was. The gallery smelled like fresh paint and eucalyptus. The soft lighting warmed the white walls, casting gentle shadows on every frame, every sketch, every stroke of ink that had once lived only in my sketchbook. Outside, the line had already formed before sunset. Inside, glasses clinked softly. The hum of voices wrapped around me like ocean waves. No forced laughter, no offhand jabs. Just people here to see the work, to see me. I stood in the back for a while, watching it all unfold. My name was printed clearly at the entrance. Camila Navarro, quiet lines, loud stories. Beneath that, smaller text read, a debut solo collection of illustration, memory, and voice. It was the kind of evening I used to sketch out in dreams, not for the praise or the headlines, but for the feeling that my work, my presence, my point of view was something worth pausing for. I didn't invite anyone from my family. I thought about it, briefly. Wondered if they'd show up anyway after the café incident, after the glances and Google searches and half-formed apologies. But in the end, I didn't send the invites. I sent them somewhere else, to the people who had actually seen me. There was Margaret, my first client from a children's book startup who paid me in installments and always wrote thank you notes in cursive. She flew in from Chicago with her daughter, who now wore a little dress printed with one of my designs. There was Elena, my old college roommate who once stayed up with me during a panic attack before my first comic launch. She stood near the mural, misty-eyed, mouthing the words from my signature panel, "You don't have to be loud to take up space." And there were the interns I'd mentored over the last year, chatting nervously with journalists, pointing to the pieces they'd seen in progress. They didn't look at me like I was some surprise. They looked at me like I'd always been this, just waiting for the world to notice. I moved from group to group, hugging people, laughing gently, receiving flowers I didn't expect. My heart felt soft in my chest, steady, unshaken. A journalist approached me during the second hour. He was young, probably early 20s, wearing a press badge from a downtown arts blog. He said, "Your work's got this. Patience to it. Like it's been waiting a while to speak." I smiled. I said, "It has." He nodded and asked, "What inspired this show?" I looked around, at the panels, the colors, the textures of every piece. Then I looked at the front wall, where one of the largest sketches hung. It was a girl on a porch, knees pulled up, sketchbook in her lap. A family just inside the screen door, laughing, too loud to notice her. But the girl was smiling. She wasn't sad. She was drawing the whole scene. I said, "People see silence as absence. But sometimes it's just observation. This show is for everyone who's ever been mistaken for invisible." He blinked. "Wrote that down." Later I gave a small speech. Nothing grand, just enough to hold the moment. I stood near the center of the room. No microphone, just my voice, soft but sure. I said, "When I was younger, people used to tell me I was too quiet, too shy, too soft-spoken to ever make anything of myself. Some of them were family, some were teachers, some were friends. But the truth is, I was never silent. I was just choosing when to speak." There was a pause. Heads tilted. Eyes watched. I continued. "This exhibit is for everyone who saw me as quiet, but never questioned my voice. For those who listened without interrupting, who supported without needing credit, for the ones who knew a whisper could move mountains." A few people clapped. I added, "They didn't forget me. They just never tried to see me. But now?" I let my gaze sweep across the room. I said, "The world sees me just fine." After that, I stepped aside and let the room live. I watched a little girl sketching on a brochure in the corner. Her dad leaned over and asked if she wanted to stay for the live demo later. I nodded to the girl. She grinned, holding up a cartoon cloud with eyes. That was the moment I felt it. Deep in my chest. Not pride, not vindication. Just peace. It didn't matter that my family hadn't believed in me, or that they only started asking questions after the world had answered first. It didn't matter that I'd been the forgotten one on the call, muted in their memories, barely worthy of conversation. What mattered was this, that I never let their oversight become my own self-image, that I kept going, quietly, steadily, until the space I built for myself grew too wide to ignore. They could think what they wanted, but I knew who I was. And that, finally, was enough.